Hi, in this lesson, we're going to be taking some notes about value and shading, and you can follow right along with me in these. So value is one of our elements of art, and what value means is how dark or light a color is. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. For this lesson, you are going to need a ruler, your 3 shading pencils, which have different numbers at the end of them, like 2B, and you're also going to need your eraser. So what you're going to do first, we're going to talk about the different types of pencils that we have, and we're actually going to use our ruler to draw a straight line right below your definition of value. And we're going to draw a little arrow on either side of that line. And right in the middle of that line, we're going to put 2B. And this line is going to represent a scale of how dark or light the different pencils that you get are. So 2B, I put it right in the middle to start because this is sort of your standard pencil. I don't know if you've ever taken a test and they say, okay, make sure you bring a number 2 pencil. Number 2 stands for 2B. So this is the type of pencil you use all the time. If you go all the way to the right, we're going to, over on this side, we're going to put H. H stands for hard. And what that means is that the graphite or lead in your pencil is really, really hard. And that means that for shading, if I'm using my 2H pencil, if I do shading with that pencil, it's going to be pretty light. So underneath hard, we'll write light. And that's because since the graphite is so hard, when you push on the paper, not that much of it comes off, right? It's like it doesn't really crumble off to make a dark line. So H stands for hard. You would think we would have S on the other hand for soft, but instead it's actually B. B stands for black, but in other words you can think of it as soft, because in your 6B pencil, you're going to have really, really soft graphite. So if I drew the same kind of line that I did over here, but over here, look how much darker and thicker that line is than this line. And I drew those pressing about the same amount of hardness. So as we go towards our H end and our B end, our numbers get higher and higher. So over here, if we have a 2B that's right in the middle, it would be like 4B, 6B, 8B, etc. You know, you get like 14B, and that would be really, really soft lead. We have an HB that's right in the middle. You would think that the HB would be like the standard pencil graphite, but for whatever reason, it's the 2B. So then we have like 2H, 4H, 8H, etc. So those are the different pencils. For us, we have the 2B, that's like your most standard pencil. We have the 6B for your darker shading, and we have the 2H for your lighter shading. So those are the 3 pencils that you've gotten. All right, next what we're going to do is we are going to make what's called a value scale. We're going to practice shading light and dark in that value scale. So you are going to use your ruler to do this, or whatever straight edge you have. If you have a ruler, what I recommend doing is just tracing a rectangle around the edges of it that's about 6 inches long. So you're actually tracing the edges of your ruler, drawing a rectangle that is 6 inches long. Now, your rectangle, if you do not have a ruler, if you're just using a magazine or something, it's totally fine if your box is not exactly 6 inches, if it's not perfectly straight, but just use some straight edge object to draw a rectangle that looks kind of like this. And then you're going to divide it. If you have a ruler, you can do this by inches, but at each inch mark, I'm going to put a little mark. So it divides up into 6 even boxes. So if you're not using a ruler, just put 5 marks, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that are about evenly spaced. And then from each one of those marks, you're going to draw a little line. Again, using your straight edge to do this. All right, so this is what your little box should look like. It should be 6 different boxes, and you're gonna label this value scale. So in these boxes, we're gonna practice shading from really, really light to a little darker, 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 darker. But to do that, we're also going to be talking about the rules of shading. How do we do really nice shading in these boxes? So over here, we're gonna write rules of shading. Now the first rule of shading, this is probably the most important one, is you want to do really tiny pencil movements. And I recommend doing them in ovals or circles or tiny back and forth. So what I mean is, and I'll actually start, well, no, I'll do that in a minute. When I'm shading, if I'm going to do some of this practice right here, I'm just doing tiny, tiny little circles with the tip of my pencil. Tiny, 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 tiny. That's my biggest tip, is you cannot make those circles tiny enough. The second thing to think about is that we are going to respect the tooth of the paper. Now the tooth of the paper means the texture of your paper. You might notice that the texture of the paper in your sketchbook is really, really smooth, whereas the watercolor paper we use has kind of a bumpier texture on it. That is called the tooth. The tooth is also the reason that when you zoom in super close, if I do some shading here, you can actually see some little tiny white spots showing through it. That's the texture or tooth of the paper. And so our goal when I say respect the tooth of the paper